Hey everybody, this is Kohdok here. I know you haven't heard from me in a while, so I figured I'd just talk about a few loose things on the radar for spring, including some that people have asked me to talk about. After both of the Kickstarter projects I highlighted made it to their goals, thanks again to any of you who contributed to them, I've been working on getting a video together about actually launching your own Kickstarter thanks to now having some first-hand experience working with one. The script is already over 4,000 words long. On top of that, I'm also working on again off again on a pair of videos about how games incorporate choice and risk, and another one about knowing your game's hook in order to pitch it, and I'm hitting a bit of writer's block on both of them. So I figured I would take some time to talk about current events in the game space, do some updates, and answer some questions people have had. First of all, Disney's Lorcana. The rules for this game dropped fairly recently, and yeah, they're about as derivative as I predicted they would be. Disney's Lorcana is yet another Duel Masters clone, not again. I mean, I let Dragon Ball Super slide when it came out because America was starved for these Duel Masters mechanics, but now we're being inundated with so many games that play the same way, I'm actually kinda sick of it. But yes, Lorcana's rules are the same sort of derivative as the game I made in 24 hours as a joke. It's another game where you can play practically any card from your hand as a resource, in this case face down, to play other cards from your hand, which can be used to attack directly or swing at an opponent's resting cards. There are 6 colors to choose from, but rather than handle it intelligently like Duel Masters, requiring matching color identity for resources, or Digimon, which requires color identity for interactions, you are instead forced to pick just 2 of these 6 colors to make your deck with. And of course, Mickey Mouse has been revealed in at least 3 different colors already, so sorry kids, no Mickey Rainbow deck for you. Otherwise, the game is the same as Duel Masters with a Hearthstone hit point system, and really only a couple of things of note. First of all, when you swing with a character, you don't attack your opponent's life points, you instead accumulate lore. That's what these diamonds on the bottom of the cards are down here, similar to other games with separate damage and combat stats. Additionally, I haven't seen any cards that interact with either your lore or your opponent's lore, which is actually kind of dull and removes the usual point of a life point system in that they can be invested in different ways. I mean, I imagine a Dr. Facilier card would have a lot of things interacting with lore, either spending your accumulated lore or giving lore to the opponent to do sorts of neat effects. Now, I assume that this lore system was added because Disney stepped in directly and said, "We don't want people killing each other in our happy, fun, family-friendly card game." But it creates what I think is the game's only really novel idea. Because the goal is to accumulate victory points rather than deplete life points, it makes games with 3 or more players a lot more interesting. It's a whole lot easier to see who's in first place, and since the goal is to be the first one to cross the finish line rather than be the last man standing, it makes the games go by more quickly and lets every player participate until the final turn. No getting knocked out early and being forced to spectate. Note, for those of you trying to quote-unquote fix Commander, this is how you do it. Just look at the original Munchkin. The effect here is that games with 3 or more players will be more interesting than your average game, but straight one-on-ones, less so. And since I assume 1v1 is going to be the tournament standard, I don't have high hopes for this game. Another interesting gimmick is songs. Songs are special spell cards that have the alternative cost of tapping a character of at least the same cost as that song, essentially making them sing it for you. I mean, this seems like a place to do something interesting, like letting characters who sing diegetically, like the Little Mermaid or Miguel, to maybe be able to sing multiple times a turn, or sing above their weight, but I worry it's gonna run out of steam quickly as there are only so many famous Disney songs to make cards out of. But yeah, I'm sticking to my guns on my Lorcana predictions. It's a ton of hype without much weight behind it. And on a similar note, the One Piece card game, one which I mentioned and also didn't really like because it feels like Bandai really phoned in the design. It is yet another game built on the Duel Master system revived by Dragon Ball Super, but without any real attempt to distinguish it from games like Dragon Ball Super the way that Digimon did. One Piece is, for the most part, the same as Dragon Ball Super. You have a leader card and minions that fight each other to try to deplete an opponent's health cards, only you're locked to the color of your leader card for the cards you can put in your deck. And your leader card can't awaken or do anything new as the game progresses. Yep, even though I have a purple film deck, I cannot use my red film card in it even though it matches the archetype because of the color locking. This color locking is actually due to the core mechanic of One Piece, Don. Don is a Japanese onomatopoeia, similar to wham or bam, but in One Piece it's also used to depict force of presence. So using Don by attaching it to characters is supposed to represent increasing a character's impact both literally and figuratively. Still, when you consider that the Awaken and Digivolve mechanics are based on story elements of personal growth and self-improvement, and One Piece's is based on a sound effect, you get a sense for how much work was put into it. You see, Dawn cards are like the resource cards in other games used to play cards. You get a stack of 10 of these and they are all colorless, hence why you're not allowed to mix colors outside of your leader card. These Dawn cards can also be attached to characters to increase their power by 1,000 points. Once. On your turn only. Loses a lot of impact in that case, since most people would rather spend their resources to play cards or use them to surprise an opponent on their turn. Oh, but there are some cards that gain abilities when a Dawn card gets attached to them, in a way that's often indistinguishable from simply paying a resource cost. Yeah, it feels like the game is painfully contorted around the clunky Dawn mechanic rather than bringing the game to life. And worse still, I don't see a path forward for it. Awaken and Digivolve had enough game space left up in the air that they were able to evolve with different requirements or operations, but how can Dawn grow and evolve? This is what makes me think this will be another 2-year game at best. And finally on the trading card game docket, Fantasy Flight announcing another Star Wars card game. The third one.
Insanity is...
No, really guys, this will work. It'll work this time, I promise. Also, say goodbye to seeing Star Wars characters in Lorcana, I guess. Moving on to miniatures. In other news, Dungeons & Dragons Onslaught still seems to be struggling to get its bearings. Like I said in my video on the subject, too many people are being frightened away by that $140 buy-in. An introductory price so high that even Games Workshop is like, bruh. I stand by what I said before, it's Dungeons & Dragons HeroClix at twice the price. However, they have finally introduced some of those promised free scenarios. 4 of them over the past several months. One of them is just level 1 for the first scenario pack, an oddball little thing that costs $25 despite containing neither maps nor miniatures. The second one is based on a special event held at some conventions at the tail end of March, where they took my advice and connected a scenario to a new miniature release like I said they should have with the Mimics, and finally a pair of 4-player scenarios playable with only the 2-player starters. Not bad, but it still doesn't tackle the accessibility issue I brought up earlier. There really needs to be a way for people to try the game at a lower price than $60, but considering the release of the Essentials Kit, which is basically the starter box minus the miniatures, for $80, it's clear that the people in charge of this game still seriously have no idea what the problem is. Like I said in my last video, the preview kit gave us our answer. Something small and fun with a quick adventure and a cheap paper mat to let people try the game in a way that perfectly segues into the purchase of the $40 expansion kits to join tournaments. Heck, building off of the Mimic and Death Knight sets, why not have sets of miniatures that includes a card with the monster stats on the front and a QR code on the back that unlocks a new playable scenario the way Crossmaster did? Accessibility is the issue. I'll repeat it until it stops being true. I've offered my solutions. Moving on. Continuing on the miniatures front is Warcradle Studios with Dystopian Wars, a battleship game I covered previously with the Sturginium Skies starter set. My big problem with the set was that it didn't include any of the terrain that made combat interesting, but Warcradle recently announced an interesting solution. A common thing to find in miniatures games are sets of terrain pieces and campaign books. Terrain pieces sold separately are introduced to add cover and line of sight mechanics to a game to make them more interesting, while campaign books provide additional rules and scenarios for players to use. Warcradle has made the ingenious decision to combine the two, merging a terrain set with a campaign book designed specifically with that terrain in mind. Now, Warhammer does these sorts of things too, but they tend to also ship with a pair of starting armies as well at a pretty high price. But these campaign sets seem like they're built to be the perfect companion piece to any starter set you've purchased. And at £65, or roughly $75 US, they're priced competitively to boot. I hope to get the chance to take a closer look at these, as I do need an excuse to finish painting up the rest of my fleet. And of course, the great unclean one in the room, Warhammer 40k's 10th edition. The rules for the game are largely the same as 9th edition, but with a focus on streamlining stat sheets and turn order, and an emphasis on loosening the grip of mortal wounds and armor penetration, and clear-cutting away a lot of the stratagem bloat that made 9th edition so unapproachable. There seems to be a greater emphasis on heavy units, as well as a new point control stat that makes different forces better at holding positions than others. There is also the revival of old-fashioned Warhammer fantasy with all the squad marching goodness the game was known for. In other news, Guardcame's Pitiless Pawn has an opponent now for future game mockups. I hear some people make little trading cards for patron rewards. Maybe I should give that a try with these two. And speaking of patrons, a big thanks to the folks on Patreon, especially Monster Crown, Spiritum, Scaldrakis, Isaac the Terrible, Weird Warp, Christopher P, Universe of Legends, Cody and Kaya, Danny, Vaughn, and Johnny D2, who paid in at the $10 or higher level. Monster Crown in particular had my $100 consultation level active during their Kickstarter, meaning they had me on call for advice that helps them reach their goal. Also, a big thanks to our $5 patrons who are scrolling past now. Just $1 per month is enough to get you access to the Discord, where folks are exchanging advice on their games in progress and even showing off prototypes on our game nights or otherwise. Recently, some illustrators have joined the chat, so it might not be a bad place to mingle. But yeah, watch this space for exciting new developments, and until next time, this is Kohdok signing off.